My name is Ryan. I'm 30 years old, and I'm a biologist. I decided to spend a weekend in an isolated cabin at Mount Rainier, Washington, to study wildlife during the winter. Arriving on a cold December night, I was greeted by a charming scene. The snow blanketed the trees, creating an atmosphere of tranquility that felt perfect for escaping the hustle of the city. The rustic and cozy cabin was my temporary refuge, but soon I realized that the area had its own secrets that would challenge my perceptions. On the first night, while jotting down notes about the local fauna, something disturbing broke the tranquility of the environment. Whispers began to echo from outside. At first, I thought my ears were playing tricks on me, a result of the heavy silence of the forest and the solitary setting. But as the whispers grew clearer, I realized they were familiar voices, coming from somewhere in the shadows, calling my name and accompanied by strange laughter. Fear began to bubble in my stomach, but curiosity propelled me outside the cabin. Armed with a flashlight, I illuminated the darkness ahead, feeling the biting cold against my face. The shadows danced among the trees around me, and the snow-covered ground crunched beneath my feet. I walked cautiously, trying to discern what was happening. The forest felt more alive than ever. As I advanced, I caught glimpses of silhouettes between the trees, but every time I drew closer, there was no one there. A freezing chill began to creep down my spine, and the sensation of being watched enveloped me, intensifying my hesitation. Deciding to return to the safety of the cabin, I heard my name being called again, now louder, as if someone were right behind me. I glanced quickly, but found only the emptiness of the forest shrouded in mystery. Anxiety surged within me, and tracing my steps back, I struggled to see the path in front of me. Upon entering the cabin, I noticed the door was ajar, and the table was in disarray, as if something had rifled through my belongings during my brief absence. The fear solidified as the atmosphere became heavier, as if something was watching me. I locked the door quickly and leaned against it, my heart racing. Trying to calm myself, I scanned the dimly lit room, hoping to find something familiar that would reassure me. The shadows seemed to loom larger, and the faint sounds of the storm outside faded into a haunting melody that filled my mind with unease. It was a reminder that even in places meant for solace, darkness could creep in. As I settled back by the fireplace, the whispers returned, echoing in my thoughts. Ryan. The sound was almost melodic, yet it was underscored by a sense of urgency. What do you want? I shouted into the silence, but the only response was the crackling of the fire and the persistent patter of the snow outside. Determined to confront the source of my fear, I took a deep breath and positioned myself next to the window, peering into the swirling snow. In that moment, I realized that I couldn't let the unknown control me. I needed to understand what the forest was trying to communicate, and, perhaps more importantly, what I had to learn about myself in the process. The night stretched on, but the connection I felt to the forest and its mysteries urged me to keep moving forward. Whatever secrets lurked in the shadows, I was ready to face them, not as a victim of fear, but as an explorer seeking truth. As I steadied my resolve, I knew that my journey through the winter woods of Mount Rainier was only just beginning, and I was determined to uncover the stories hidden beneath the surface. The night dragged on slowly, filled with intermittent whispers that echoed in the walls of the cabin and in my mind. I tried to focus on my work, but paranoia grew with each passing minute. The creak of the wood, mingled with those alluring voices, made me feel vulnerable, as if there were no escape from the tension hanging in the air. The sound of the blizzard outside became oppressive, and every movement in the forest only scared me more. Finally, when the light of the sun began to break through, I decided it was best to leave. The urge to escape the cabin and the strange presence that seemed to imprison me became urgent. As I stepped outside, I noticed footprints in the snow near the door. However, they were odd. They didn't look human. They were large and disproportionate, threatening in their presence. Observing those marks, I understood that something had passed through there, and the feeling that this location was not just a cabin, but a crossroads of mysteries, followed me all the way back home. During the drive, My mind couldn't distance itself from what I had experienced. Each time I closed my eyes, visions of the cabin and the whispers echoed in my head. Even with the sun shining, a part of me felt the darkness of the forest surrounding me. What had happened in those moments of darkness? What kind of entity inhabited the forest, and why had it called my name? The questions continued to haunt me as I drove towards civilization. A reminder that sometimes our experiences are not only connections with nature, but also with the nature of the unknown. Since that day, whenever I return to Mount Rainier for research or excursions, the memories of that cabin haunt my experiences. The light I saw through the trees, the voices that called me, and the feeling of being far from home remain as persistent states of unease. No matter how much I seek to explore the biodiversity and natural wonders of the area, a part of me will always be susceptible to what I couldn't comprehend during those dark, cold nights. What I thought would be a tranquil getaway, transformed into a mystery, I continued to attempt to unravel, even though I didn't quite know how. As the months passed, the experience became a topic of discussion among friends and colleagues, and the curiosity around me expanded. Once, during a conversation with a group of biologists studying animal behavior around Mount Rainier, I shared what had happened in the cabin. To my surprise, many of them also had accounts of strange experiences in that area, including inexplicable sounds and visions of floating lights. The feeling of not being alone in my experience warmed my heart a little, but also left me feeling unsettled. What seemed to be an isolated phenomenon was, in fact, common among those who ventured into the forests. Intrigued by the connection we had with the forest, I decided it was time to revisit the cabin. My intention was to confront what I had lived through and seek a resolution to it. Although a chill ran down my spine at the thought, the force of curiosity and the need for closure grew stronger than my fear. I returned prepared, equipped with a new camera, a notebook, and, most importantly, the right mindset to seek understanding. This time, upon arriving at the cabin, the environment felt different. The air was heavier, and a sense of expectation hung over the place. I observed the footprints I had left last time. They were still there, almost as if they had a story of their own, and the wind seemed to whisper, inviting me to enter. The memory of the whispers and the flickering light still stirred in my mind, but this time, I engaged my intuition in search of answers. On the first night, I tried to focus on my work, capturing the landscape and studying the wildlife around me. But as the evening progressed, old fears began to resurface. While taking notes, a voice called me softly from a distance. My heart raced. The sensation that the voices were returning compelled me to get up, deciding I needed to investigate once again. As I moved through the surrounding area, the snow beneath my feet crunched familiar sounds. The moonlight illuminated the trees as if guiding me. But as I approached the edge of the forest, the intensity of silence heightened. Listening attentively, I realized this time the whispers were clearer, almost as if they wished to reveal a truth I needed to hear. Through the trees, I saw a faint light, like a dancing flame. It was irresistible, and curiosity pulled me closer. But just as the light began to settle in my mind, it also started to fade, as if playing a game of hide and seek. I tried to call out, but the voices were quickly drowned out by the sound of my own heartbeat, and I found myself paralyzed, terrified yet almost fascinated. Desperate for answers, I ran back to the cabin. Upon entering, the door slammed shut behind me with a noise that echoed through the silence, and locked inside, I sat in primordial stillness. The experience had taken on a layer of reality, and the feeling of being watched shifted into an invisible protection. For a split second, I made a profound connection with that place, a connection that was no longer just about fear, but about belonging. As morning light broke, the atmosphere calmed, but the marks and echoes of that night remained chained to my mind. I decided that, unlike the first time, I was not seeking a specific answer. I was looking to understand the role that the forest and its whispers played in my journey. When I finally left Mount Rainier, I realized that the experience that once haunted me had transformed into something that could nourish my art and my life. As I drove toward the city, I couldn't help but gaze at those mountains that were now more than just a beautiful backdrop. They were filled with ancient songs and echoes, a destination rich in legends and life lessons. I understood that I would always carry with me the experience I had gone through, and that the voices were not mere hauntings, but silent guidance along my path. That trip was not just a quest for wildlife. It had become a true rite of passage. The forest and its stories sealed in echoes had become part of me, a reminder that every place and experience has its own voices, waiting to be heard. Back in my daily routine at home, I began to apply this new perspective to my work as a biologist. Nature became more than just a subject of study. It became a revival of emotions and experiences. The art of listening to what isn't visible started to fascinate me, guiding my focus in research. Instead of just looking at numbers and flora, I began to also record the stories that surrounded them, exploring what local communities said about the habitats and the legends associated with each place. Over time, I organized an exhibition about the experiences I had in Mount Rainier. The show not only addressed biodiversity, but also the voices of nature, the living stories that pulse in every corner of the forest. When the exhibition opened, the atmosphere vibrated. Visitors looked not only at the images, but also felt the emotions I infused into each photograph, imbued with whispers and memories. On the night of the opening, a friend asked me how those experiences of fear and doubt had transformed into the beautiful exhibition before them. I smiled, remembering the shadows and emotions I had experienced in the forest. I replied that fear is, in fact, a door to the unknown. It is an invitation to explore what lies hidden in the interstices of nature. The voices guided me, and now, rather than just asking questions about wildlife, I sought to understand the depth of what those experiences meant. The feedback was incredibly positive, and over time, I began receiving invitations to share my story at other exhibitions and seminars. The account of the whispers in the cabin transformed into a comprehensive conversation about the interaction between humans and the natural world. I understood that the experience was not limited to me, but that others also went through events that challenged logic and required a deeper interpretation. Thus, the narrative that originated from that terrifying and numbing experience transformed into a song of liberation and connection. I realized that nature is not merely a setting. It is a circle of life, of vibrant communities, both visible and audible at the same time. With the passage of time and the stories being told, my admiration for the interconnectedness of all of us grew. With each new trip to Mount Rainier, the forest greets me with a renewed sense of purpose. I no longer contemplate the trees merely as physical entities. They are now objects of stories, places of reverberations intertwined with lives across generations. As I listen to the rustling of leaves and the murmuring of water streams, I'm reminded that nature has its voices, and sometimes the best way to listen is to remain silent and respect the space of every living being. On my last visit, while walking along the trails, I paused to contemplate what could be yet another special moment. I closed my eyes and allowed the sounds of the forest to envelop me, bringing with them memories that revealed that fear, while real, can also be an invitation to become more attuned to the world. When I heard a distant whisper once again, I smiled. The forest was merely greeting me, an echo of the interaction we had established. The past and present intertwined once more, and I knew that my connection to the environment was constant. What had started as a quest for wildlife had transformed into a journey of acceptance and understanding of the truths that nature had to teach. The whisper I heard in the cabin would never cease to exist, but now, to me, it is a melody that harmonizes with the beauty of the unknown. Life is filled with echoes, and as we move forward, we are invited to listen to each and every one of them. My name is Kasia. I'm 27 years old, and I'm a writer seeking inspiration. At the end of January 2022, I arrived at a hidden cabin in the Tatra Mountains of Poland. The atmosphere was magical, with snow-covered peaks creating a charming setting, and the tranquility of the environment seemed ideal for focusing on my next novel. However, this serenity would soon begin to unveil a darker side that I was unprepared to face. On the first night, as I typed frantically and anxiously on my laptop, a strange light caught my attention, shining from outside the window. At first, I thought it was just the light of a car passing on the road, but upon looking closer, I realized there was nothing but the silent snowfall blanketing the landscape like a white mantle. To my surprise, the light appeared again, more intense and pulsating, dancing among the trees, as if calling to me at every moment. The presence of that unusual glow intrigued me deeply, and curiosity compelled me to investigate. I decided to step outside, thinking it might be an illusion caused by the snow reflecting the moonlight. As I moved closer to the source of the light, it suddenly vanished, a brightness extinguished in the air. Frustrated and a bit frightened, I returned to the safety of the cabin, but fear began to tighten in my chest. The oppressive atmosphere of solitude intensified, turning the cabin into a prison of uncertainty. That night, every creak of wood, every sound of nature left me restless and anxious. With each whisper of the wind, the shadows seemed to shift around me, and the feeling of being watched became almost palpable. I felt as if someone or something was observing me, an invisible presence lurking outside. I was unable to concentrate on my writing. Instead, I spent the night listening to the darkness and trying to convince myself that there was nothing there. Nonetheless, the light continued to flicker between the trees, and what I once thought were just voices in the wind seemed to take form, echoing indistinct whispers that danced around me. A whirlwind of emotions overtook me. Part of me was terrified and wanted to stay inside the cabin, while another part pulled me toward the darkness, challenging me to uncover the truth behind those lights. Gathering my courage, I knew I had to confront the unease. It was more than just a fleeting curiosity. It had transformed into a driving force that urged me to understand what lay hidden in the shadows. Taking a deep breath, I opened the cabin door and stepped out into the frigid night, determined to discover the source of that strange light and to face whatever mysteries the Tatra Mountains had in store for me. Each step into the snowy landscape felt like traversing a threshold into the unknown, where courage and curiosity intertwined in a dance with fear. When day finally broke, a sense of relief washed over me. However, looking out the window, the light that had fascinated and terrified me was gone along with the night. The sun illuminated the snow, but something inside me remained restless. Determined to leave that unsettling place behind, I packed my bags and headed toward the door without looking back. With each step, though, curiosity urged me to investigate further, but there was no way I could stay there any longer. As I stepped outside the cabin, I noticed tracks in the snow leading into the forest. However, they weren't mine. Large and strange marks, as if something or someone had passed through there during the night. My heart raced. Adrenaline coursed through me rapidly, and the feeling that something was following me intensified as I left the cabin. I couldn't allow uncertainty to create a knot in my mind, so I kept walking, though the unease haunted me. That experience not only shook me, but became the foundation for my new story. Reflecting on the events of the previous night, I realized that the whispers and the lights were manifestations of the curiosity and fear that dwell within us. Historically, the mountains hold their own narratives, hidden in the shadows, and the voice of the forest was waiting to be heard, even if it had no physical form. As I finally got into the car and drove away, the uncertainty about what I had truly seen on those frigid nights remained etched in my mind. As the mountains faded from the rearview mirror, the road stretched out before me, a symbol that each journey contains mysteries, and sometimes the best inspirations come from experiences that unsettle us. The light in the darkness and the murmurs of the forest would remain as reminders that some curiosities can lead to terrifying discoveries, but also to revelations that change our lives. And so, each time I write about my experience in El Bolsón, with each word flowing onto the page, I feel the presence of those voices and the pulsating light guiding me. The connection between that terrifying moment and my work has become intrinsically established, driving my creativity in ways I never imagined possible. The narrative unfolding in my mind is not just about whispers, but about the struggle between human curiosity and the unknown that nature holds. As I resumed my routine at home, the story of the cabin followed me like a shadow. Even in moments of leisure, the image of the light between the trees haunted my thoughts, challenging me to consider that there might be more than just natural beauty in the woods. The forest had its own stories to tell, and often those narratives carried warnings we could not ignore. Diving deep into the tales of the local folklore and the history of the mountains, I realized how cultures intertwine with the environment around them. I learned that many in the region had similar experiences involving dancing lights and mysterious presences in the forests around Mount Rainier. In some way, everyone seemed connected by an invisible network of whispers, as if the very air was steeped in these ancient stories. One day, while visiting a local bookstore specializing in folklore and mysteries, I found a book that captured my attention. It recounted tales of inhabitants who heard the voices of the forest speaking among themselves, guiding travelers but also warning them of dangers that only the most attentive could notice. I was filled with a new inspiration. Perhaps I was not merely seeking to write a horror story, but a fable that united the echoes of the past with the present. This realization invigorated my writing process, allowing my thoughts to flow freely onto the page. I started weaving together the narratives of my encounters with the supernatural and the rich tapestry of folklore surrounding the areas I had explored. Each story became a thread in the fabric of my understanding, illuminating the relationship between mankind and the enigmatic forces of nature. As I wrote, I felt the shadows of my past experiences transform into a source of wisdom and strength. The juxtaposition of fear and curiosity served as a catalyst for creativity, reminding me that the unknown is not something to dread, but an opportunity for exploration and connection. In embracing these themes, I began to craft tales that honored the spirits of the places I had visited, intertwining my personal journey with the collective stories of those who had come before me. In this way, my time in El Bolson not only became a chapter in my life, but a foundation for my writing and a commitment to exploring the wonders and mysteries of the natural world. Each word penned served as a dedication to the voices of the forest, ensuring that their stories would be heard and respected as they continued to guide me on my path of discovery. I decided that my next novel would be more than just a simple work of fiction. It would be a distillation of my experiences, blending the search for answers with ancestral narratives. Instead of fearing the unknown, my challenge would be to explore it while honoring the presence of what I could not see. The idea of telling the story of how nature speaks, intimidates, and simultaneously embraces became my new goal. I took detailed notes on everything that had occurred in El Bolson, and inspired by the light I saw, I developed characters who would explore the same arc of discovery that I had experienced. The forest would become a character in its own right, imbued with mystery and wisdom, inviting readers to reflect on their own experiences and fears. The desire to share the beauty and complexity of nature grew within me, and I committed to bringing that message to life. As I wrote, I realized that the work required not only words, but also a visual representation that would capture the Baroque feelings the forest stirred within me. Thus, I began to explore photography as a complementary medium, capturing images of nature that mirrored the emotions I wanted to convey in the narrative. Each click of the camera was an extension of the story being created, a quest to document the truths that the mountains concealed. The images I started to capture during my walks reflected the interconnectedness between light and shadow, the idea that nature had its own voices and that silence could be as eloquent as sound became central to what I wanted to communicate. The cabin, the whispers, the invisibility of what surrounded me transformed into fundamental pieces of my narrative, giving me the freedom to explore the essence behind the human connection with the environment. By the conclusion of my project, I realized that what had begun as a search for inspiration had turned into a personal journey of self-discovery. The forests of El Bolson were laden with stories, and my experience only highlighted many of them. Any whisper, any strange light could be an essential call to pay attention. And so, as I launched my work among readers, I did not merely share a story. I opened a dialogue that echoed the hidden truths in the forests, reaching hearts and minds with the same beauty and mystery that those mountains had offered me. I was reminded that no matter how terrifying or inexperienced an experience may seem, it has the potential to teach us about ourselves and the world around us. My name is Alex. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a winter tour guide. I decided to rent a secluded cabin in Mont-Tremblant, Quebec, for a weekend getaway amidst nature, far from the stresses of everyday life. The snow was gently falling when I arrived at the wooden cabin, and the silence of the forest surrounding the area was reassuring. I was eager to enjoy the solitude and unwind in the company of the mountains. However, what was meant to be a peaceful weekend soon turned into a nightmare. On the first night, as I settled in front of the fireplace and started to read a book, I noticed the flames danced in a comforting display of warmth. The setting was perfect for a quiet evening, but as darkness deepened, I began to hear soft knocks at the door. At first, I thought it might be an animal approaching, but when I looked through the window, all I saw was snow and the trees bathed in a silvery hue by the moonlight. Ignoring the knocks, I returned to my reading, but they persisted, now more insistent, like a plea for help creeping through the cabin's wooden walls. Driven by curiosity, I got up and went to the door. Upon opening it, I found a man in a worn-out appearance. His clothes were soaked, and his lost gaze was an unmistakable plea of desperation. He asked if he could come in to warm himself, and though an initial wave of concern washed over me, compassion took the place of suspicion. I invited him inside, a gesture that would quickly become a grim decision. As the man settled in, he began to share stories of things he claimed to have seen in the forest depths. These were accounts of spirits and creatures roaming the snow, testimonies of inexplicable encounters. Although I tried steering the conversation toward lighter topics, something in his eyes, an urgency, made me pause. As the storm began to pour heavily outside, the cabin's atmosphere grew tense, and the man's presence became increasingly unsettling. The storm reached its peak, and the feeling that something was very wrong solidified in my chest. The man, who was initially restless, started pacing in circles, muttering incoherent words about those who watch and what is to come. My heart began to race, and I questioned whether I had made a mistake by letting him in. The urge for him to leave grew stronger with each passing moment. Yet something stopped me from acting. Without warning, the man stopped and gestured toward the window, as if expecting to see something outside. At that moment, he looked at me, and the panic reflected in his eyes sent a wave of unease through me. Sensing confusion and fear, I was driven by impulse and led him to the door. But as I opened it, the cold and storm pierced the cabin, and at that very second, the man vanished into the night. Words failed me, and facing the fierce blizzard, I searched for him, but all I found was the suffocating void of darkness. I slammed the door shut, the weight of what had transpired draining every ounce of energy left in me. The feeling of being utterly alone in the cabin became oppressive, as if the very space was mocking my vulnerability. For hours, the storm's voices echoed in my mind, and the only sound I could hear was the frantic beating of my heart, the wind's roar, and a lingering sensation that something was trapped between nightmares and reality. Although the rain ceased by morning, the weight of that night refused to lift. The imprint of the occurrence still lingered with me, and a fragment of that experience was now etched into my being. As I looked out the window the next morning, the winter scenery held its own mystical beauty, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The snowstorm had shaped a landscape concealing something profound, and the figure and voices remained an echo in my understanding. I decided I needed to leave that place eager to distance myself from the echoes of the unknown. Closing the cabin door behind me, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Stepping into the piercing cold, the fresh air brought a slight sense of comfort. As I walked to my car, each step in the snow seemed to echo a silent dialogue about what had taken place. The desire to understand and confront what I had witnessed and heard pushed me away from the cabin, but the memory of that figure still hung in the air like a disconcerting shadow. When I finally reached the car, I started the engine and left the cabin behind. The overwhelming mix of emotions made me wonder how a simple weekend had turned into such a strange and terrifying experience. The vision of the man disappearing haunted me, and questions about his intentions echoed in the silence around me. What could have happened if I hadn't opened the door? Yet, there was something deeper that the protagonist of the story concealed within the forest shadows. The journey back was a struggle against a rising tide of emotions. Although the rain and winds had calmed, the unease persisted. What I had seen had become a part of me, and as I drove down the road, the beauty of the scenery around me felt like an indifferent cry to the fears I carried. I knew my experience wasn't unique. Many others had likely faced similar situations in remote places, and the voices I heard might have been echoes of those who had been there before. In the days that followed, writing about my experiences in my journal became a way to regain control. I wanted to organize my thoughts and emotions, making them as clear as the mist that had lifted from the forest. This led me to research stories of others who used the forests of Quebec as a refuge. I began discovering numerous accounts of strange presences and inexplicable phenomena, a web of narratives that impressively intertwined. It was during this search that I decided I needed to share my story. Gathering courage, I posted about my experience on a forum dedicated to supernatural encounters and enigmatic experiences in the woods. The responses were swift, but what truly surprised me was how many people identified with what I had lived through. Their stories were as diverse as they were interwoven in a vibrant field of curiosity and support. Through this new means of connection, I forged a bond with others who had faced similar experiences. I discovered that by sharing, I could not only immensely validate my own fear, but also help others overcome their nightmares. It was the strength of human connection, even when based on experiences of terror, that united us and made us more attuned to what nature has to offer. I decided it was time to return to Tremblant, not as an escape, but as a quest for truth. I invited a group of friends who knew about my experience and shared my desire to understand what had really happened. Together, we headed again to the cabin, now with a fresh determination that uncovering the hidden truths in the forest would be an act of courage and solidarity. As we arrived, I felt the cabin watching us, like an old friend but now seen through a new lens. Instead of fear, there was a desire to understand everything that would unfold. The air was frigid, and as soon as we stepped inside, the atmosphere felt charged, as if nature was preparing for a deep and revealing dialogue. When the snow began to fall, a certain clarity flooded the environment. We knew we would have to confront our curiosity and fears. We agreed to stick together, armed with flashlights and a commitment to face our challenges with bravery. The whispers still lingered on the walls, and as we sat in a circle, the connection we formed grew stronger, like an invisible web of support binding us together. That night, we made a pact to respect the forest and listen to its stories, to recognize that the shadows have lessons to teach. The figure had spoken to us through our own courage, and now, armed with knowledge and strength, we were ready to embark on our journey. As dawn broke, we set out to explore the forests around us, ready to face the echoes of the past and discover what awaited us. Our connection with nature deepened, and the determination to respect what the forest could teach us united us more with each step. As we ventured into the snow-covered expanse, we felt a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Looking around, the forest was shrouded in a soft mist, and an awareness that the atmosphere was alive pulsed around us. With our lanterns lit, we felt a bit safer, but the shadows still moved as if waiting for us. The sun slowly began to rise between the clouds, but the cold still bit at us. Gradually, we approached the clearing where we had encountered the figure during our previous visit. The place now felt more familiar, yet a mystery still loomed in the air, as if the trees watched us with every movement. Once we reached the clearing, we decided to form another circle, creating a space for sharing and recognition. Each of us expressed our impressions and what the forest meant to us at that moment. The notion that the presence of the figure might be linked to stories and experiences that others had also faced began to weave itself into our conversations. Together, we resolved to confront these fears and expand our understanding of what we had lived through. As we shared our thoughts, I could sense an energy building among us, a collective resolve to embrace the unknown. We understood that it was through this shared vulnerability that we could honor not only our own experiences, but also the spirits of those who had come before us in the sacred space. The forest was alive with stories waiting to be uncovered, and we were ready to delve into its depths, seeking clarity and connection. Together, we ventured deeper into the woods, where the snow crunched beneath our boots and the air was thick with possibility. With each step, we felt a blend of apprehension and hope, knowing that the journey would unveil not just the secrets of the forest, but perhaps unveil the hidden truths within ourselves as well. Tom pulled out the journal we had brought as a symbol of transition. He began reading the stories he had recently discovered, those echoes of memories that formed our connection. "We must honor those who came before us," he said. His expression was filled with determination and insight. Respecting the presences in the forest became a commitment, and we decided that on every future trip, we would perform a ritual to thank the voices surrounding us. Gathered once again, we began to write messages on small pieces of paper, expressing our gratitude and respect. The act of sharing our feelings felt like igniting a flame that united us. When we finished, we decided to bury these messages beneath the roots of a nearby ancient tree. With the commitment to respect and embrace the connection we formed, each of us felt lighter and at peace. In that moment of healing and unity, we heard a soft whisper passing between the trees, as if the forest were responding to our gesture. The fear that had once dominated us gradually dissipated, replaced by a sense of belonging to the cycle of life. The figure that had once seemed like a being of terror was now a respectful presence and a symbol of connection to the ancestral wisdom of the forest. As the afternoon wore on, we decided it was time to step away from the clearing and move forward. The path unfolding before us was filled with opportunities, and the forest became a space where life pulsed vibrantly. As we began to tread the trail, I looked back and noticed the shadow of the tree under which we had left our messages. It was a reminder that our lived experiences were intertwined in learning and growth. The feeling of unity enveloped us as we walked across the snow and the cold. We talked about our experiences in the forests and how what we had lived carried deeper meanings. Each step resonated like a hymn, celebrating the new awareness we had gained amidst nature. We understood that the shadows would always be present, but now we were more than just adventurers. We were those seeking to understand and protect those who inhabited the forest. By the end of the day, as we returned to the cabin, a wave of gratitude washed over us. What had once brought us fear was now a testament to courage and humanity. And so, as we looked out at the sunset reflecting on the snow, we knew we had a commitment to honor the lessons that nature, the stories, and the voices of the forest had imparted to us. Leaving Tremblant once again, our hearts were filled with hope and our thoughts illuminated by the experiences we had lived. The shadow had become part of our narrative, but now, as we drove along the well-lit roads, it no longer followed us as a feared specter, but as a guardian of the forest's wisdom, always ready to guide and inspire us on our journey. As I returned home, a new message formed within me, that the forests and their shadows are places deserving of respect, always willing to teach about what it means to be part of the cycle of nature and life. The journey through those forests had become an extension of our own growth, allowing us to see not only the fear, but also the value and beauty in the experiences we faced. Back in a routine, the familiarity of daily life made us briefly forget the anthropomorphic whispers and dancing shadows. Yet, whenever the cold weather set in and snow began to fall, memories of Lake Placid resurfaced. The recollections of the hooded figure and echoing voices seemed to awaken in my mind, reminding me that being connected to nature was both a responsibility and a privilege. As weeks passed, each time I felt the winter fog create a familiar backdrop, it served as a reminder that the forest always harbored its mysteries, and for some reason, the shadows had now chosen me to share their stories. A quiet disturbance rooted itself inside me, as if the essence of that figure was feeding off my curiosity. With this in mind, I decided it was time to return to Lake Placid, not as a fearful visitor, but as someone willing to confront the experience head-on, ready to learn from what we had previously lived through. I invited Jake, Kyle, and Sarah, all eager to embark on this new journey with me. Our hearts were full of determination to explore the forest that had once made us tremble, but now promised a new understanding. When we arrived at the cabin, a sense of nostalgia washed over us. It was as if the old wood was waiting for us, its planks carrying the stories of our first visit. But now, it was all imbued with new purpose. The interior space was drained of light, and the atmosphere seemed to watch us. Yet instead of fear, there was a respectful anticipation. As night fell, we prepared for the significance of confronting our journey. The notion that the previous whispers called to us had now shaped into a true invitation for exploration. We lit the fireplace and decided to revive the ritual we had started in the clearing, forming a circle around the fire where we could all express our thoughts about what still haunted us and what we wished to uncover. As the flames flickered, casting warm shadows on the walls, we shared our feelings and fears, each story strengthening the bond among us. The fire crackled, almost in response to our words, creating an ambience that felt sacred and alive. I could sense that our collective courage was amplifying, forming a protective barrier against the past's lingering shadows. With our hearts open and our minds attuned, we acknowledged that this journey was not just about the unknown lurking within the forest, but also about the journeys within ourselves. Each of us had faced our own fears, and tonight, we would not only confront those fears together, but also transform them into something meaningful. As we settled into the circle, I felt the weight of our shared experiences and the wisdom that accompanied them. The forest outside held its breath as if waiting for our next move, and I knew deep down that we were ready to embrace whatever came next. The ritual was a bridge between our past encounters and the potential for understanding that lay ahead. We were more than just seekers in the woods. We were a collective yearning for connection, truth, and a deeper bond with the spirit of the forest. As we shared our feelings, the atmosphere began to shift. What had once been a field of tension transformed into strength, a visible bond formed by our voices. The whispers of nature surrounding us now joined in unison, echoing our desires for understanding. What had previously represented faint echoes of fear had now evolved into testaments of courage and rebirth. "I'm afraid of the unknown," Jake confessed, but his words were now filled with determination, as if courage was narrowing the path ahead. But I also want to understand. I can't ignore what I saw. Each friend's words formed a pact, a connection that made our quest for understanding stronger than our fears. After our ritual, we decided it was important to explore the forest again, ready to find the clearing where we first spotted the shadow. Armed with flashlights as the morning light began to shimmer in the sky, we resolved to face whatever we encountered, fully aware that we were always a few steps closer to greater understanding. When we finally reached the clearing, the beauty of nature was alive, energizing us after hours of trekking. The whispers began to dissipate, and the shadows started to appear less like threatening shapes and more like guardians of a secret. Immediately, we sensed that something was changing. What had once seemed a terrifying experience was now becoming a reason to celebrate. And there, standing in the clearing illuminated by the morning light, We understood that our experiences of fear and shadow were, in fact, invitations to grow and explore. The guardian of the forest was present, but not as a menacing shadow. It was an important part of the journey that allowed us to truly explore who we were. What had led us to encounter the shadow was now transforming into understanding, and the forest shone with a light of renewal. As we left Lake Placid, there was a new sense of hope and wisdom. What we experienced was no longer a burden, but an eternal lesson about how shadows and light can coexist in harmony. Our connection to nature was now solidified, and as we looked back, we knew the forest would always play a role in our lives. We left Lake Placid with light hearts, each of us carrying the story of the shadow, not just as a ghost to be feared, but as a lesson that taught us the strength of courage and unity. I felt that place was etched in our memory, not as a postcard of fear, but as a symbol of overcoming. Over time, our experience became a narrative shared in regular gatherings, where we remembered the challenges we faced and how the shadows were now part of the story we built. Talking about the presence that once scared us allowed us to honor the guardian of the forest. Soon, the figure that had once seemed a manifestation of terror symbolized the protection nature could offer to those who sought to understand its mysteries. Our gatherings grew in number and significance. We were no longer just a group of friends, but a community of explorers. We began organizing expeditions and visiting different forests, always respecting their stories. Each new adventure brought fresh challenges and lessons. What had started as fear transformed into a genuine respect for nature and its anonymous inhabitants, spirits, shadows, and invisible guardians that dwell in the spaces we call home. I decided that with each new trip we embarked on, we would have rituals to celebrate our connections with the places we visited. Every time we lit a campfire or gathered in a circle, we would encourage the exchange of experiences, providing a safe space where shadows were not to be feared, but welcomed. The forests were not just sites of adventure. They were places of learning and transformation. With each journey, a new layer of understanding emerged. We discovered that understanding the shadows was more than just solving mysteries. It was about accepting that by confronting the unknown, we became more whole. What could have once been a symbol of fear now offered us a space to grow and evolve. We learned that the guardians of the forest were not merely representations of evil, but the essence of what nature truly represents, a cycle of life, death, and knowledge. Over time, the figure that had watched us in Lake Placid became part of our shared stories, a constant reminder that the most terrifying experiences can also be the most revealing. The voices that had once called to us were not just echoes of the past, but messages that guided us to a new understanding of our place in the world. On our most recent trip to Lake Placid, there was an unspoken invitation among us, for each of us to share a renewed vow of commitment to nature and the mysteries it reveals. Sitting by the lake under the gentle light of the late afternoon, we made this promise. It was a recognition that the forests and mountains held our fears and hopes, and we were ready to embrace that complexity. The shadow that once seemed to haunt us now reflected a silent friend, a mentor helping us see beyond appearances. As we left the lake, I looked back at the dense line of trees and felt that the forest would always be alive in our memories, each shadow telling a new story, each echo a call to discovery. And as we drove home under the blue sky, we knew that returning to these forests would be part of our journey, a journey that would not only allow us to confront our past, but also celebrate the eternal cycle of learning and connection. What we experienced in Lake Placid was not an end, but a new beginning, and we were ready for the next adventures that life would offer us. Thus, we left the shadows behind, but carried with us the courage to face the unknown and the commitment to never forget what nature and the stories of the forest had to offer us.